What's up everyone? So today I want to talk about benchmarking. As many of you know, benchmarking is basically testing the performance of any kind of product. In the PC world, you can basically benchmark any computer component that you want to. The issue that I'm bringing up today is properly reading benchmarks, specifically graphics card benchmarks, and taking them for what they really are. Now, the way that most people judge a component's performance is based on their average performance. It seems like the most fair and cut and dry way to really evaluate a product because you get to see how it performs on a regular basis. Now, this is a good way, and it should be one way that you really evaluate some product, but it should not be the only way that you evaluate said product. Averages are decent indicators of average performance, but they are poor indicators for proper outliers. For instance, say that I got a 70% on my first test and then an 80% on my next test. My average is a 75%. Now let's say that my friend got a 50 on his first test and then 100 on his second test. His average is also 75%. Yet, if I had to bet which one of us would pass the next test, I would pick myself because I passed both exams despite us having the same average. That's what's wrong with averages overall. They don't show any kind of disparity with test cases. The RX 480 and the GTX 1060 are two video cards that explain this methodology fairly well. Now, we're going to look at games where the average FPS of each card is within 5% of one another. Why? Well, because if it's within 5%, then that means that they're pretty much performing identically to one another on average. So to determine which one is the better buy, we have to look at the proper outliers, and in this case, it will be the minimum FPS reached. If we look at Fallout 4 shown on screen, you will see that the 1060 6GB edges out the 480 by less than 0.5%. But if we look at the disparities between their averages and minimums, you will see that the 1060's disparity is about 9% larger than the 480's. This basically means that there is a bigger jump between the average and minimum FPS, which possibly can result in what we call lag spikes. On the other hand, in Doom, using OpenGL, the 480 edges out the 1060 by 1%, yet has a larger disparity between its minimums and average frames per second, an increase of 5% over the 1060. Now, I plucked out all the games where the difference between the 480's average FPS and the 1060's average FPS was 5% or lower, and then I made an updated graph showing the average percent difference between their minimums and averages. At 1080p, the 480 has an average disparity of 31.825% between its average and minimum, while the 1060 has an average disparity of 38.925%. That's about a 7% difference between them, nothing too crazy. But if we flip the switch to 1440p, the scene changes a bit. On average, the RX 480 has a 31.033% disparity between its averages and minimums, a 17% improvement over the 1060. This can be due to a number of things, but my first guess is the 2GB difference in VRAM between the two cards. Unfortunately though, this is still not the best way to properly evaluate PC components, specifically video cards. The best way, and I say best because it is the most realistic out of all the ones that I've researched, is to evaluate the frame times. Now, I won't get too much into it because Tech Report has a nicely written article about it, and Gamers Nexus also talks about it pretty well. But in layman's terms, the time between each frame pretty much dictates gameplay fluidity. As a general rule of thumb, the faster the frame timing is, the better. But you also got to remember that consistency between frame times is more important than the faster frame time and the faster average FPS. Now, I'll give you guys an example. On screen is some gameplay of Infinite Warfare. If the average time between each frame is 16.7 milliseconds, which equates to about 60 FPS, then you're pretty satisfied. But let's say for a single frame, the frame time increases to half a second. That half second is huge and can change the entire flow of the game. This is what we call stuttering or lag or whatever else we have named it. If this half-second skip happens too often, the game pretty much becomes unplayable. Now, if you have a game where the average frame time is slightly longer, perhaps 20 milliseconds, which is about 50 FPS, consistently, then the experience is much more fluid. Frame times, honestly, are way more important than anything else because they actually give you real-world performance. The people at Gamers Nexus took it a step further and they determined the minimum and average FPS based on the 99th percentile of the frame timings, making it a way more accurate average FPS and the minimum FPS because it pretty much gets rid of any major outliers. If you guys want to check that out, then I should be having a link on the screen somewhere, and I'll also have a link in the description as well. The bad news is that unfortunately, frame times are still being assimilated into journalism culture, so not a lot of review sites actually use them or use them as accurately as they should. Now, I'm kind of guilty of this as well, so I will try from now on whenever I'm benchmarking something to show you guys the frame times and kind of explain it in the video. Honestly, it's not that difficult because Fraps, a completely free, well, somewhat free software, has a frame timing evaluator pretty much built into its software. And I also have a 1060 and an RX 480 laying around, so who knows, I might be able to show you guys a little bit more on that and test those out and give you guys the results back. So what have we learned here? Basically, average frames per second are an okay indicator of raw performance, but they are not the best. If you are looking at a card or any component that people are reviewing, then you should definitely look at the minimums because those are the worst case scenario that is very plausible. And you should also look at the frame times because they both together give you a better understanding of the real world performance of that component. So yeah, average FPS is needed to a certain extent, but at the same time, it is overrated. Now, if you're going to compare an RX 480 to a GTX 1080, then average FPS would be the way to go. But if you're going to compare something much closer to the 480, such as the 1060, then you definitely need to analyze those details, such as the frame times and the minimum average FPS as well. So yeah, that's it for this video, guys. If you guys enjoyed it, then definitely leave a like. And if you loved it, subscribe because I have more videos like this coming out. I really miss making these kind of explanatory, if that explanation, I don't know, these kinds of videos where I just kind of sit down and I explain a concept. So if you guys want to see more of these, just let me know and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.